Well, happy Sunday, everybody. I am late, but grateful to be here nonetheless. So, hopefully, you've waited a few minutes for me to get here, and I'm hoping that you enjoy this. Now, I'm doing another keto version of an English muffin, but we're going to switch it up a little bit this time because this time we are going to use yeast. And we're going to use a couple of ingredients that we haven't used before. We're using inulin, which is how do I put it? It's not a sugar substitute, but it's something that you can use to feed yeast instead of sugar, and it doesn't have an effect on your blood sugar. So that's fun. Now, if you don't have inulin, and I know a lot of kitchens just don't have all of the weird and wonderful ingredients that I have, by all means, use a little bit of sugar. The yeast is going to eat that sugar, and there's not going to be any carbs left. But using inulin just absolutely guarantees that. So that's what we're going to be doing today. Now, the other thing that we're going to be doing today, hi, Del. The other thing that we're going to be using today is oat fiber, and oat fiber is not something that we've used when we're together, but I'm really enjoying oat fiber for a couple of reasons. So first of all, it is not the entire oat, it is just the oat fiber. And oat fiber is an insoluble fiber, so it does not get into your system. It just helps things move through your system. It's just a fiber that kind of goes in one end and out the other, I guess. So that is keto, where oats are not. And the reason that it's keto is because it has no effect on our blood. It doesn't have any effect on inflammation because it doesn't hang around. It isn't in our system to do anything. It's just passed through. So oat flour is going to give this a nice nutty flavor. And oat flour, no, not oat flour, oat flour. Oh, good morning, Holly and Tammy. I'm glad you guys are joining me. So oat fiber is keto. Oat flour is not. When you're using the entire oat, now you're using a grain, and that grain is inflammatory for humans. So let's get busy and make some English muffins. Now, the fact that this uses yeast, that's a hint that it needs to rise for a while, but we'll deal with that. Okay, so the very first thing that we are going to do is we're going to mix our dry ingredients. I'm using an instant yeast today, which is why we're not going to worry about blooming the yeast right off. So we're going to use 60 grams of almond meal, and we're going to set this bowl aside because we're going to need that, and I should probably show you what we're doing here, hey? Not a bad idea. Okay, so we have 60 grams of almond meal. Set this bowl aside. We're going to need that in a little bit. And then we are going to use 30 grams of oat fiber and 15 grams of protein whey isolate. Now, the protein whey isolate, yeah, well, it's for horses too, and cattle, and I guess whatever else. Not so much for people, though. And you know, when you think about it, how many stomachs does a cow have? And so a lot of the grain and the plant matter that cattle eat, they have 4 stomachs that it goes through. I don't know how many stomachs a horse has. I don't know. See, that shows you how much, but I'm betting since somebody said, Holly said it's for horses too, I'll bet you she knows. Okay, so the next thing that we are going to do is we are going to add 1 teaspoon of baking powder, and we're just going, or baking soda. And then, now I just lied to you. That was not 1 teaspoon of baking soda. That was half a teaspoon of baking soda. It's going to be 1 teaspoon of our homemade baking powder. And if you weren't here when I made the baking powder, it is 2 parts cream of tartar, 1 part baking soda. And then you have baking powder that has no cornstarch, no sugar, no fillers, no anything. And I use citric acid instead of cream of tartar, which is just fine, but I always run my homemade baking powder through a small sieve, and that way you don't end up with lumps of baking powder in your baking, because that's pretty disgusting. I did that one time. I was about 13 years old, and to my horror, it was when I was baking something for my grandmother, and she was the one that got it. Okay, so then the next thing that we are going to add is half a teaspoon of inulin. And the inulin, remember I said the inulin is going to take the place of the sugar for our yeast, and we're going to add 3.5 grams of instant yeast. Now, if you want to do activated yeast, I guess you can do that too with a little bit of water. And okay, so that is it for our dry ingredients. Now we need to get our wet ingredients together. So we need butter, which apparently I forgot to weigh. So we're going to do 18 grams of butter, and then we're just going to pop that in the microwave for a minute. Now zero our scale. That's 24 grams. That is definitely way too much. If I was doing 100 grams and I had an extra 5 grams, it wouldn't be as big a deal. But it's about proportions, right? Okay, so that's 20 grams. That is 18 grams. Now remember that your scale weighs in full grams when I am doing things with spices. I have a scale that weighs to 1/100th of a gram, and that works out perfectly because the recipes that I'm trying to create end up being exactly the same all the time. When you're baking, getting within 1 gram, that's fine. So we have all of our dry ingredients mixed together here. We are going to have our butter warmed up. Okay. Now, I'm going to throw a couple of these in the oven. Oh, mio mio. Okay, so because this has yeast in it, we definitely are going to want to let it rise for a while. So I have some rising. Okay, there is half a teaspoon of apple cider vinegar. Now, it calls for 25 grams. The original recipe that I was playing with called for 25 grams of sour cream. However, I do not have 25 grams of sour cream in my fridge right now, which is a little bit surprising to me. So we're going to use some 25 grams of cream and half a teaspoon of apple cider vinegar. So that's going to sour that cream. And then the next thing that we need, and the last of the wet ingredients, well, second last, is an egg, which I just totally did not crack into a separate bowl, and I can't even remember the last time I did that. And then we're going to add 1.5 tablespoons of room temperature water. Now, it's important if you're using instant yeast, make sure your egg, well, instant doesn't matter. Make sure your egg is at room temperature, your cream is at room temperature, your butter is melted. It doesn't need to be blazing hot and boiled, but it does need to be melted. And then we're just using a small wire whisk to whisk this up really well. Now, this is awesome when you're working with eggs. I've started playing with different kinds of whisks. It's amazing the different results that you get and the different kinds of things that you learn when you're using the right tools. So one of these days we will talk about different kinds of whisks. Okay, so this is this is the one that I am using today. There we go. Okay. Now we are just going to make a little well in the center of our dry ingredients, just like that. And pour our wet ingredients in. Now remember, we've got the yeast and the inulin in here, so this is going to, the liquid in here is going to feed that yeast. And then we're going to get it into ramekins, so we're going to get this all mixed up. And you want this thoroughly mixed. That is important. And then we're just going to divide it into 4 ramekins and set it aside to rise. So if your kitchen isn't warm, just turn your oven on for a couple of minutes, a few minutes. Let it get to about 100 degrees-ish. And then throw your, there we go. Then throw your dough in there to rise. So before we do anything else with this, we're going to use a little bit of bacon fat, and we're going to grease these bowls. This is important. We want these to come out easily, and I'm using bacon fat because why would I not use bacon fat? And you know, all of these articles that you read that say bacon fat is terrible for you and it clogs your arteries, and if my arteries need to be clogged with something, not that bacon fat does that, but it doesn't, but if they're going to be clogged with bacon, I guess that's better than the alternatives, like vegetable oil. But bacon fat, saturated fat, does not clog your arteries, but a lot of people don't know this. Bacon fat does not clog your arteries, but carbohydrates do. So, if you are eating a high carb diet and your doctor tells you that you have high blood pressure and your blood sugar is a little bit high and you've been suffering with other ailments, it is not because of the saturated fat that you're eating, it is because of, oops, a little bit much in that one. It's not because of the saturated fat that you're eating, it is because of the carbohydrates that you're eating. Okay, now we are going to split this into 4 bowls. Now I probably should have greased these before we started. That way we could have just gotten on with it, but I didn't. So here we are. And almost done. Now you want these even. If you weigh these on your scale and zero each bowl before you put it on, you will know exactly how much you're getting in there. But this is going to be good enough for what we're doing today. That one is a little bit shy, so we're going to add a little bit more in there. And we can weigh these when they come out, and then we'll know how close we got. Okay, now you want to set these aside and let them do their thing for half an hour to an hour, and then we are going to put them in a 350 degree oven for 30-35 minutes. So I don't know that my other ones are going to be done yet, kids, but we are going to set these aside and let them rise. But I will show you the ones that have been sitting are rising a wee bit, but not a lot. So they may need to rise for a couple hours. And when I'm preheating my oven, there's a vent on the top of your stove that brings the heat out of your oven. I set them a little ways away from there. It keeps the air a little bit warmer. So these are risen a little bit more than they were. I'm going to leave them rising for another half hour or so, and I'm just going to take a peek in the oven and see if the ones that we have in there are anywhere close to being done, and they are not. So I'm going to post some pictures when I get these done and get them out of the oven. I guess we're not going to be having breakfast together, but this is something that you can do at home. Remember, if you're using instant yeast, you have to make sure that you're adding all of the dry ingredients together, wet ingredients together, and give it a try. But wait for my pictures. If this is an epic fail, and this is the first time I've done this, so I don't know whether it's going to work or not, but I will absolutely let you know. We are going to be making keto puff pastry next week. I have found a recipe that I am very much looking forward to trying. And so next week is going to be the day. And so next Sunday, you want to be here because we're going to have some keto puff pastry and some ideas for how to use it. So thank you very much for being here with me today. I'm glad that you popped in. Whether you are here for the live or here after the live, make sure you look in the comments. That's where I'm going to post the pictures. So we'll see how this turns out in an hour or so. I'm sorry I didn't have some baked before we got here, but the mystery is for both of us. So please do your very best to be the best version of you that you can be today. Call someone that you haven't talked to for a while, or go and see them. It's amazing how much it will brighten their day and yours, and you both deserve it. So thank you for being here. I will see you next Sunday, 10 a.m.